This is the bizarre reason why Mormons dominate ballroom dancing. And I say bizarre because people don't often put a very hyper devout, faithful religion like Mormonism up against something like ballroom dancing, which is often very sensual and the outfits are very suggestive. And so I say bizarre because many people think that Mormons can't even dance at all, and yet they make up a huge amount of the dancers in Dancing with the Stars. And really many other different famous dancers that are very well known. You Google their name, ask if they're Mormon, and a lot of times the answer is yes, they're a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, of which I used to be a member. This question has always been interesting to me too, because as a member of the church, I grew up going to church dances all the time. This was a very common practice in the church, and still is to this day, that as a Mormon youth, you're allowed to go to church-sponsored dances. They usually happen once a month. It's maybe 100 to 200 kids, depending on how many members and how many youth are in your congregation and in the congregations near to you. And this was kind of like almost an example of Mormon speed dating growing up for me, where, when you turn 12, you're allowed to go to these dances. They're very formal. It's not, it's not maybe what you would conceive of as a typical high school dance where there's just like a bunch of kids dancing to hot, sweaty music in the middle of the dance floor. This is, boys often are kind of on one side, girls are on the other. A boy always asks the girl. It's very rare for a girl to ask a boy. It's just not really tradition. And then once you get asked to dance, you have about 2 minutes to chat with this person of the opposite sex, typically to be one-on-one and have a one-on-one conversation with a boy at 12 in any other setting might be considered somewhat taboo. But this is kind of the first opportunity you have to start in a very acceptable way, getting to know a member of the opposite sex in a one-on-one while, touching type of setting. I also learned many formal dances, not to say I was good at them. I purchased this little outfit as a way to, be on topic for the conversation. It's just an Amazon dress. It's certainly not as fancy as many of the dresses the professional ballroom dancers wear, which are hundreds of dollars. But I figured if we are talking about ballroom dancing, I may as well make sure my outfit is on topic. Dance is so ingrained in Mormon culture, not just because of church dances, but because it's also used as missionary work. And I have reconnected with several friends as an adult who I knew in high school, and many of them have recounted not just that I attempted to give them a Book of Mormon, but that they actually attended a church-sponsored dance with me, and we, swapped stories about what it was like for them. And it's kind of interesting because even though I rarely could get a non-member friend to come to church with me, not just because their parents wouldn't let them, but because they also didn't want to go to church, but it was quite easy to get a friend to come to a dance with me because it's just fun, right? And so I often growing up, and many members growing up, use youth dances as a kind of segue into missionary work because it's a way that you can invite someone to an activity that's not overtly religious, but that still will kind of get them in the door to see if maybe they want to come to church down the line. One of my favorite jokes from church dances is that everyone would always joke that you should keep a Book of Mormon in between you. You and your partner should never be actually touching, other than, the woman, you're touching the man's shoulder, you're holding hands here while you dance, but that you should never be chest to chest. You should always keep a Book of Mormon between you. And this joke became so common that the leaders actually addressed it and said, this is not enough space. You should actually keep at least a quad in between you. The quad is just a Mormon version of what's in this book. This is only sold by the Mormon Church, is the Bible, New and Old Testament, the Book of Mormon, and the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. So this is all of Mormon scripture. So instead of just the skinny little Book of Mormon, you need to put a little bit more space between you and your partner so that you're not tempted by the devil to have any inappropriate thoughts at all. So that's a little bit of context as to my personal experience with dancing. And keep in mind, my experience with dancing, even though it was fairly consistent and constant, is still nowhere near the level to which many Mormon youth experience dance. And even when I was growing up, there was a boy who was learning ballroom dance, and he ended up meeting so many members as a youth, so many Mormons, when he was just as a non-member participating in ballroom dance, that he actually did end up getting baptized into my ward, my congregation, as part of his experience just with ballroom dance in general, and then ending up meeting so many members of the church that he ended up converting, serving a mission, marrying in the temple, still a member to this day. This cultural context, of course, has always existed in the back of my mind, but when I started making ex-Mormon videos about Mormon history, there's certain trends that start popping up that people ask about that I never had personally considered. So for example, one of these trends, which inspired this video, is so many people asking, why is it that so many members of Dancing with the Stars, so many of the dancers who are dancing with the celebrities, why are so many of them Mormon? This is a question that came up so consistently in comments that I finally decided to fully research it. And what I found out about the long history of Mormons and dancing was so interesting and surprising and bizarre that I decided I have to make a whole video about it. And if you go down the rabbit hole, you can very quickly realize how long people have been asking this question about Utah, ballroom dance, dance in general, and Mormons, and why these things are all combining into making so many famous and well-known dancers that are dancing at a national level. There's so much evidence for this that I actually need to scoot over so that when I edit, I have room for my citations off to the side here. But there are Reddit threads, there's a 2018 World Religion News article, there's a 2008 Newsweek article. I even found this 1975 article in the New York Times titled, "Why so much dance in Utah, of all places?" There's a few quotes I'm going to highlight from this 1975 article, but one that I wanted to share at the top is that even in 1975, Salt Lake City, the state capital, is the only city in the country outside of New York to have a year-round, nationally recognized professional company for both ballet and modern dance. In this video, I'm going to give an overview of the kind of current landscape of Mormons in dance. We're going to talk about some of the people in Dancing with the Stars and how they factor into the Mormon dance landscape. Then we're going to get into the history of dance in Utah and among the early Mormon church, and how that early obsession and love of dance created the culture that exists now in the church of dance as being a tool for missionary work and a tool for excellence, and how that culture generated so many well-known dancers. And we're going to discuss the tension between Mormonism, which is very traditionally minded, purity and modesty minded, and what modern ballroom dance asks of the dancers. I put a ton of research into this video, but also keep in mind that in addition to my research, I'm going to be sharing my own extrapolations and opinions, and so you're getting a little bit of both in this video. In a 2017 article from the Deseret News, and keep in mind the Deseret News is the Mormon Church's news outlet, so it's owned by the Mormon Church. Everything is kind of published through the lens of Mormonism by that news outlet. They shared that Mormons may represent less than 2% of the US population, but last week they comprised 50% of the finalists on ABC's popular reality show Dancing with the Stars. In the episode they're referring to, 3 of the 6 dancers on the season finale were members of the Mormon Church. And this was not something specific just to 2017, but has been happening on Dancing with the Stars and the show So You Think You Can Dance for a long time. I'll put all of these people's social profiles off to the side here, and I'll link them below. You're obviously going to see that these people have millions of followers. They're also often dressed immodestly. I've shared a lot on my channel about garments. You can watch a full garment explainer in my video here, but just keep in mind we're going to get into the like I said, the tension between wanting to be traditional and modest, and why it's okay in the church's eyes for them to be dancing this way. Keep in mind, I'm sharing an article from the Deseret News where they are bragging basically about how dominant they are in ballroom dancing, and they're proud of it, even though obviously all of the dancers really are wearing clothing that would not be considered modest or appropriate by the church's own standard. So we'll talk more about the modesty element, because I think that's one of the most common questions I get in a bit. But first, we're going to go over, just to establish my claim about how dominant Mormons really are in this landscape, let me share just a few of the most well-known examples of this phenomenon. Donny Osmond and Lindsay Sterling are examples of contestants who were members of the Mormon Church. We also, though, have many, many dancers who are kind of the ones that are responsible for teaching the celebrities how to do the dances and then going on stage and dancing with them. A lot of the dancers are Mormons, for sure. And I feel like I had this experience over and over again where I would be looking at a long list of names, and every time I would just pick one out of the lineup and just randomly Google it with the word Mormon next to it, of course they are. So I'm giving a short list here of Mormons, but there are so many of them that I would probably bore you to death with making a complete and exhaustive list here. So I'm just listing the most famous ones. We have Derek and Julianne Huff. They are, I would say, some of the most famous. So Derek Huff was the fourth of 5 children, born in Orem, Utah. All of Derek Huff's grandparents were dancers, and his parents met while on a ballroom dancing team in college in Idaho. When I looked into that college in Idaho, it is, of course, Brigham Young University, Idaho. At the time, it was known as Rick's College, but this is a college owned and operated by the Mormon Church, and that's where his parents met. His parents are also, and Julianne's parents are also, was a chairman of the Utah Republican Party, so they seem pretty plugged in, pretty affluent is my guess. Julianne and Derek are siblings. She was born in Orem. She's the youngest of the 5 children. She won season 4 when she was 20 years old, making her the youngest star, the youngest dancer on Dancing with the Stars to win a season. She does have a quote about her religion. She said, "I'm not practicing, but I'm so glad I was raised Mormon," and she left in 2013. Before we continue, just a quick reminder to like this video, subscribe to my channel. If you haven't yet, drop a comment. If you have a question about ballroom dance or modern dance or ballet dance or anything about the culture or history of the church, especially in Utah, created so many different little interesting research projects to look into. And so drop a comment below. And a reminder that all of my videos are available early and ad-free on Patreon. Next on the famous Mormon dancers docket, we have Lindsay Arnold and Riley Arnold. They are both still active in the Mormon Church. Lindsay, I would say, seems to be, of all of the dancers, the most outspoken about being a member of the church. Here's a clip from a TikTok video she shared about a year ago about what it was like for her to grow up in the church.
I grew up in Provo, Utah. Utah is kind of widely known as being a very Mormon heavy state, but there's also a lot of people who aren't Mormon in this state as well. I was born into Mormonism. My mom had been a Mormon since she was born as well. My dad actually converted when he was 19 years old. I remember so many positive things about growing up Mormon. Loved that every Sunday there was something that we did together as a family. Now, of course, there were those teenage years where I was like, oh, Mom, I don't want to go to church.
So that brief clip is just her sharing what she says is a very, and I believe her, that very positive experience growing up Mormon. She goes into more depth on some of the rules and the specifics, and I'll put the link for that original video below. She did also share a video about her thoughts on the secret lives of Mormon wives, which I wanted to share one clip from that video as well.
I grew up in the LDS church, and never once have I felt like I was being raised to be a housewife for my husband and my children. Never once have I felt that. My parents were the biggest propellers in me pursuing my professional career dancing. There was never a moment of well, no, Lindsay, you need to stay home and just be a mom because that's your calling in life. I personally was never taught that in church growing up or ever perceived anything like that.
It's very interesting to watch Lindsay's videos, and if you're curious more of her perspective as someone who is a very well-known professional dancer and a very outspoken advocate for her own experience in the Mormon Church, to say, this is what it was like for me, it was very positive. Her videos are just an interesting kind of glimpse into what that mindset is like for her. I do find some of what she shares to be fairly interesting, considering that, she's sharing, I was never expressly taught that my calling was to be a wife and mother, which is just almost makes me feel like you're saying you're going to church every Sunday. I don't know how that you can go through a childhood, adolescence, and then adulthood in Mormonism without getting that message, because it is so deeply baked into not just the culture, but very specifically into the doctrine of Mormonism. In every home, there is a proclamation to the family. Every Mormon home I've ever been in has this document somewhere on the walls, very prominently displayed. I'm guessing she has it in her house too, where it expressly teaches that a woman's primary role is to be a wife and homemaker within the home. Also, as I've shared in another video about what I consider to be my own wifely training, Personal Progress constantly is mentioning that your divine mandate is to be a wife and mother. And so I feel that it's a bit disingenuous for her to share that specifically, that she was never taught that, because it's just everywhere. It is everywhere in Mormon teaching for young girls that that's what our role was. So I felt that that was potentially a little bit maybe disingenuous, but it also seems that she really believes what she's sharing. I think it's also ironic that in this video she's wearing a tank top and short shorts, and you can't wear that with garments. And the teaching is that when you're just getting ready for your day, you are under a divine mandate to wear those garments during that time. So if she's dancing, that's a gray area because it's an athletic activity. But when you're just chilling, getting ready at home in your robe or, putting your makeup on, that is very expressly said that that's a time you should be wearing your garments. So it feels a little like a lot of what I'm going to share today, which is just somewhat false advertising, where, you can say you love Jesus and you love the Mormon church and you go every Sunday, but if you're getting ready wearing a tank top and shorts, you're not following the temple recommend interview questions, which says, do you wear the garment night and day as instructed within the temple? So it feels, I think, in some ways like the ballroom dancing is just one example of how Mormonism and these missionary efforts of being, famous and being glitzy and sparkling is a great advertisement for Mormonism, because people are very interested in these beautiful women who are great dancers or great mothers or etc. But if you go and read the doctrine, which they're being proponents of, they're fundamentally not following what is expressly stated by these doctrines, by these rules, by the expectations. So it is, to me, a little bit of false advertising, which is why I think a lot of people feel frustrated by people who are saying, I'm a full, capital M Mormon, you can trademark it, I'm doing all the things, and I'm here to say, it was really positive for me. But then if you go and fact check and look into if what they're saying is true about the church, it's not. And so it's just, to me, a little frustrating. And I understand why people would feel that it is frustrating. This person in her comment says, the women they chose to represent the LDS church kind of blows my mind. Honestly, it blows my mind that this woman, they are saying, is a good representation of the Mormon church, because she's not wearing her garments when she's getting ready for the day. This other commenter said, I'm LDS. LDS is another term for Mormon. All these LDS women saying they never felt pressured to be a housewife and just pursue marriage, kids, etc. Like, literally how? I don't believe that. General Conference, Relief Society, parents, etc. And has, 125 likes. And this person is even coming at it from, hey, I'm currently Mormon. I don't know how you could get to adulthood and honestly say you were never taught that, because it is doctrinally the truth. So it's just confusing. It's just a little bit of a misrepresentation. Lindsay Arnold also has a sister named Riley. She's also on Dancing with the Stars, also from this same Mormon family. She was recently interviewed about how her boyfriend was on a mission and how they ended up breaking up, it seems, because he was on a mission. So, she's in Utah. Riley, like Lindsay, seems to be very Mormon. She's Mormon full stop. And she's Mormon in a way that I think many would say they're okay with the representation. A lot of people were saying The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, not an accurate representation. But to me, it's shocking that they don't want The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives girls, but they're very over the moon about the Arnold sisters, who are fully not modest in dancing very sensually on camera, but I guess because they're doing it the right way, we're more accepting and even like promoting of these people. We also have Whitney Carson McAllister. She is Mormon. She went to American Fork High School. Her husband served his mission in Romania. She's another dancer. We have Jenna Johnson, raised in Provo. She I danced with JoJo Siwa recently. She was also on So You Think You Can Dance. A lot of these dancers seem to kind of go in between and have been on both shows, both So You Think You Can Dance and Dancing with the Stars, and any other, TV shows or media that might include dancing. They're usually top pick since they're well-known dancers already. Brandon Armstrong is another one. He moved to Utah at age 12, and he also married a Utah Mormon. I found this Reddit thread that was asking about the connection between Mormons and Dancing with the Stars, and I thought this one comment was pretty interesting. They said that early on, Dancing with the Stars was very Eastern European centric within the dancers. They shared a whole list of early dancers on Dancing with the Stars, and that basically through, once they got past the early seasons, they started transitioning more to these Utah Mormon dancers because they shared that the Eastern European teaching style can be aggressive or abrasive, and that didn't sit well with the celebs. Perhaps the Utah crew were more patient and amicable, which totally would track in my mind because Mormons are very much known for being nice as the key word there, happy, shiny, nice people. And so I thought that theory was interesting, which kind of tips us off into our next section, which is the history of dance in Utah and amongst Mormons specifically. Keep in mind, Mormonism started in New York with Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith is the person who, quote, translated the Book of Mormon from the gold plates. Ex-Mormons and most non-Mormons would say he either copied it from other contemporary books or he made the entire thing up. Joseph Smith also founded the Mormon Church. Mormon is a nickname from, of course, the Book of Mormon, but it's actually known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So it started all the way over in New York. But because of the religious persecution and the Mormons getting into a lot of mischief wherever they went and having a lot of issues, typically there'd be a city and the Mormons would come upon the city and start saying, God said we were meant to be here, and basically increasing the population by so much and having so many Mormons and saying they're only going to vote for certain people who represent their interest. And basically they just ended up getting kicked out of a lot of places, and there's an entire map of all of these cities where they try to settle, and the locals and even sometimes the government, in the case of Missouri, say, nope, you're not allowed. The Missouri governor, Governor Boggs, even issued an extermination order against them. So it was definitely, to me, after reading a lot of the history, a mix of legitimate religious persecution, but also the Mormons doing some dumb shit that people were like, if you were just not doing this, we might be more okay with you settling here. But getting into starting their own militia and not really fraternizing with the locals and being very insular, they ended up getting kicked out of most of the places they tried to settle. As Joseph Smith was organizing the church and growing the church, he was in trouble with the law a lot. There's a whole list of, all of these times that he was either arrested or tried and found guilty of all of these crimes. So as he was in jail waiting trial for one of these crimes, a mob came and murdered him. Polygamy is a whole other reason why people really didn't like what the Mormons were up to. And so all of these things, it's a whole history, culminated into Joseph Smith getting killed. And after he was killed, Brigham Young took, there's a bunch of factions, but Brigham Young took the primary faction, and they decided to go into what at this point was not even United States territory, into the West, and settled in what is now known as Utah, but at that point was just the frontier. Because the Mormon Church was very insular and often not even necessarily directly related to Christianity, Joseph Smith was involving a lot of mysticism, a lot of his own visions and ideas. Brigham Young kind of continued that tradition. It meant that a lot of Mormonism was quite different from a lot of the factions and the religious groups of that time that were in that area. In this time of Joseph Smith, which was in the early 1800s, dance was still considered to be something that was very British. And because the United States had recently, fought this war to get rid of the British and start their own thing, dance was still not really accepted as something that was super ultra popular because it was seen as being so British, and the United States was still trying to break away from this British and Eurocentric tradition. And in 19th century Protestantism, dance was considered very taboo, and the fiddle was an instrument of the devil. And so that's why we get a movie like Footloose, which shows that dance is something that is immoral, it's too sensual, it's not pure enough, and that's why they're all dancing in the middle of the night, kind of secretly, while their parents aren't understanding or knowing what's going on. Which is another reason why people are surprised to find out Mormons can dance at all, because when you think of a high demand, very traditional, very orthodox religion, you don't think of lots and lots of dance. You would think of people who are very subdued, very quiet. I mean, keep in mind, you're not even allowed to clap in a Mormon chapel. You know, I've had so many experiences where someone will do this awesome song from the pulpit, or they'll do their violin, and after it's over, when I would have on my mission, when I would have a convert come with me to one of these meetings, the convert would start to clap, because you kind of expect that clapping is something that, you know, is like something that should be done after someone finishes a professional or a very well done performance, but there's no clapping, which is kind of showing that some of Mormonism does have those very serious, more somber aspects of their religious observation, but dance just does not make the list, and the reason for that is specifically because of Brigham Young. In the 1975 New York Times article, it says that Brigham Young, unlike many other Protestant religious leaders of the time who preached that dance is wicked, he urged his followers to go to the dance, study music, read novels, and do anything else that will tend to expand their minds, add fire to their spirits, improve their minds, and make them feel free, untrammeled in body and mind. Brigham Young was raised Methodist, and Methodist is one of those sects that was very against dance. He said, this is a quote from him in 1846, "I had not a chance to dance," he said, "and I never heard the enchanting tones of the violin until I was 11 years old, and then I thought I was on the highway to hell if I suffered myself to linger and listen." So he was raised as a Methodist, as someone who was not even really supposed to listen to secular music. Brigham Young, though, said that he vowed he would never subject his little children to such a course of unnatural training. And so Brigham Young set Mormons on this path that was unlike most of what the rest of the country was experiencing when it comes to dance. Because keep in mind, most of the religious side of the country was not wanting to dance because it was baked into the doctrine that dance was wicked and evil, but also culturally, because so much of the United States was still trying to escape the cultural traditions of the British, they doubly so were not interested in dance. And so now we have Brigham Young, who's taken his followers far outside the bounds of the United States. He's actively teaching that you should be dancing, you should be listening to music. And so if Footloose was actually set in a Mormon town, we'd see the kids dancing all the time, but in a very still particular and moralistic and gendered way. The dancing that Brigham Young set up is still not a freewheeling, do whatever you want, shake it however you want. It's still going to be something that is very complementary to ballroom dance, which is prim, proper, men are leading, women are following within the dance. And so the way the dance evolves is not just, we're not getting twerking coming out of Utah, we're getting ballroom dance, which is for a very specific reason. But before you go thinking that Brigham Young was just the most enlightened man on the planet and he is just creating this beautiful community full of people happily dancing from place to place, keep in mind Brigham Young also said that interracial marriage should be punished by death. He also encouraged that the followers should keep the Native Americans within Utah when they first got there, that they should be taken as slaves. He also had 56 wives, the youngest of which was 13 years old, and most of them he married when he was over 40. And so the Mormons being out in Utah, which remember was still at this point just Mexican territory, they weren't able to join the rest of the United States until they were willing to give up polygamy in 1890. So we kind of have this basis, right? Brigham Young, he's out with his followers in Utah. He's encouraging dance as a way for people to get active and just as a totally moral way to enjoy your body, enjoy the world. And we have that juxtaposed with the rest of the United States, which is anti-dance, anti-British, and very Protestant in their religious beliefs. As shared in the 1975 New York Times article, later when the gold rush threatened to lure young men away from Salt Lake City, the Mormons organized an elaborate plan which basically included folk dancing, and even today, each Mormon subdivision or ward has an official dance instructor. And so the gold rush is another test where the Mormons continue to institute dance as a way to keep the followers, hey, if you go to the dance, you can dance with a lady friend, they're still using dance as a way to get converts. In the late 1800s, we also see the institution of something known as the Mutual Improvement Association. And if you were Mormon or raised Mormon, you would now know this as Young Men's and Young Women's. My youth organization was called Young Women's, which is not a very fun name, but you would just say, hey, I'm going to Young Women's this Wednesday. That was the name of the youth group. That actually started as the Mutual Improvement Association in Utah. And so this was the foundation of the Mormon Church deciding to create a program just for youth. And if you are also Mormon, you'll recognize that sometimes Young Men and Young Women's is also known as Mutual. The Wednesday activities is called Going to Mutual. And so that Mutual Improvement Association, we've carried that term mutual because that's an opportunity to, go have some mutual time with the opposite sex. That is that term, that phrase or word carried over. A note too that a lot of what I'm going to start pulling from is from this really amazing dissertation I found that is from Dr. Denise Machine, and it's called Find Your Places, Please, Gender in the 21st Century U.S. Amateur Ballroom Dance Practices. And she actually went and was a non-member who observed how dance is done at BYU. We're going to get into how BYU just turns out a huge amount of ballroom dancers, and how that's an entire program that was founded on this dance as a concept within Mormon culture. I actually got to talk to her for a while. I asked her a lot of questions for this video, so huge shout out to her. Thank you for giving me so much of your wisdom. I also have to say that when you say I'm going to read a dissertation, maybe that sounds boring, but if you want to geek out about this subject more, you should go, I'll link it below, you should go read the whole dissertation because it has so many amazing noteworthy quotes that I'm going to share that I just kept as I was doing my research for this video. My husband works from home as well, and so I would go run into his office and say, I have to read you this quote from this dissertation. So highly recommend if this is a subject you want to keep learning more about. And thank you to her for taking my call and just for all the research that she put into her dissertation. So getting back to the Mutual Improvement Association, as part of this association, they had dance as a formal activity that they would do, which is also, as I shared at the top, what I would do as a Mormon youth, go to dances and just learn the waltz, learn all these different forms of formal dance that I was taught even just going to my own Mormon congregation as a youth. Mormon historian David Britton explains that in 1825 that there was something called a round dance, which was the precursor to ballroom dance, was becoming popular and replacing square dances. The original concern was not over the steps necessarily, but rather the closed hold dance position in which the dancers had to frame each other, meaning hold hands on one side and have the man's hand on the woman's waist on the other, as opposed to holding hands. So essentially, this is the time when basically dances are becoming, instead of a square dance or a quadrille, they have round dances, which is going to become ballroom dancing, and the hold is just a little bit more intimate. And so in 1910, there's a quote about making sure there's no body contact, which, keep in mind, I'm hearing quotes like that as a Mormon youth myself, keep the quad between you. And so as part of the Mutual Improvement Association, they begin integrating this style of dance, which we now know as ballroom dance. In 1939, the Mormon Church went as far as to publish an entire dance manual just for Mormon youth to learn how to dance. It covers rhythm awareness, positions, poise, relaxation, and knowledge of the steps. This dance manual was very interesting. I was going to order it, but it wasn't going to make it here on time for the video. So here's someone has it on Etsy right now. So definitely go if you want to look more closely at some of the phraseology. It's just an interesting little insight into early 19th century Mormonism and what they were teaching the youth. I think it has some fun little illustrations as well. There is also a page included of how to do a dance. And so just a quick plug, if you want to go on my Patreon, me and my husband are going to try to learn that dance. Neither of us are good at dancing, but if you want to go see us attempt a Mormon dance from the early 1900s, a ballroom dance from the early 1900s, that'll be published on my Patreon as well if you want to see us show that we both have two left feet. It will also be an opportunity for you to see my entire ballroom outfit if you want to see it in its full glory. And one thing I can't overstate that I just kept seeing in my research is basically just how much, as the Mormons are integrating dance into their youth programs, into their, weekend activities, it's becoming something that is very pervasive in Mormon culture throughout this phase from Brigham Young into the 1900s. We see that dance in the rest of the world is not nearly something that they're focused on. There's still many places, many religions are still teaching it as evil. And because of this early on allergy to dance in general, because of this British tradition, we really see how most of the country is not nearly as focused on dance versus Utah being hyper focused on dance. And so this really is the beginning as to why dance in Mormonism is so dominant, because for over 100 years, Mormons were dancing and learning it in their youth groups and doing it on the weekends, while much of the country was still viewing it as either too British or as evil. This video is, of course, mostly about ballroom dancing, but this desire to dance extends not just to ballroom dancing, but to many different genres or types of dance as well. Specifically, I saw ballet quite a bit in my research and modern dance. William Christensen is a man who brought ballet to the West. He was a Mormon. First, he started in California, but he settled in Utah because as a Mormon, he had to go take care of a sick family member, which meant he ended up in Utah instead of California. Soon after his arrival, he established the University of Utah as the first school of ballet at an American university. So if I stop someone on the street and I said, trivia of the day, where was the first school of ballet at an American university? What city? People would almost certainly say New York, but the answer is actually Utah in Salt Lake City. William Christensen is the person that's mainly highlighted in the 1975 article about dance and Utah Mormons. William Christensen is actually credited with bringing the dance the Nutcracker to the United States. He started a dance company in Salt Lake known as Dance West, and they still to this day claim that they are, and they also are, they're not just claiming, they are known as America's first Nutcracker. I also found this interesting because obviously Ballerina Farm is someone that a lot of people have known about. She's been in the news for that article and everything, and she also was a ballerina. She went to Juilliard, and so I thought that was another interesting connection back to this whole theme of dance in Utah, that her being a ballerina and going to be at Juilliard isn't something that is incredibly atypical, because Utah has been known for many decades as a ballet hub in addition to being a ballroom hub. Now I wanted to discuss how the Mormon Church uses dance as missionary work. And anyone who's familiar with the church knows the church does a lot of outreach and a lot of missionary work. I served a 1.5-year full-time mission for the church to Denver, Colorado, where all I did basically was knocking on doors, trying to get people to listen to the message and convert to the church. And this is something that has always been a huge part of Mormonism. A lot of religions religions are very closed off from the world, but Mormonism has always been a church focused on trying to get converts. And even with Joseph Smith, he was sending out lots of men on missions to Europe, a lot of missions, to the Native Americans. And some of those men, after he sent them on missions, he tried to convince their wives, these women who were already married, to marry Joseph Smith after he had sent their husbands away. There came a point, though, in the late 1800s where the Mormons are in Utah and they're basically realizing that they need to join the United States or leave. They even founded colonies in Mexico and colonies in Canada because the United States government was basically saying, you can't join the States if you're doing polygamy. Polygamy is not okay, according to the United States, and the Mormons were very much engaged with a lot of polygamy. I have polygamy in my direct line. I'm a multi-generational Mormon, now ex-Mormon, but I have multiple generations in my family line where there was polygamy, men with multiple wives. And so in 1890, they decided, okay, we are no longer going to be this insular religion. We're going to give up polygamy and we're going to attempt, we're going to join the United States and we are going to modernize. And part of this turn became the choice that basically instead of being closed off from the world, that they were going to go and be in the world but not of the world. And this phrase, in the world but not of the world, is one that I heard so often growing up, that our responsibility was to go be in the world, to be missionaries, to find non-members, to find converts, but not to be of the world, to still hold our standards. And you see a lot of Mormons, even in Lindsay Arnold, she's talking about how she went to LA. She's being on Dancing with the Stars, but she's around people who are drinking, but she's the example of a good Mormon that is choosing not to partake and showing, basically kind of giving herself the ability to be around a lot of non-members, and this is not just her, but all members, be around people who aren't members of the church, but to kind of show this is how great this Mormon lifestyle is. And once they realize how great this, no drinking, modesty, no sex before marriage, blah, 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 rules. Once they realize how great that lifestyle is and how happy I seem, they'll want to ask, what makes you so happy? And that is kind of what the Mormon hope is to be in the world, to be seen, to be admired for the lifestyle. I almost said our lifestyle. It's not my lifestyle anymore. But then use that as an opportunity to share the gospel. And so after they gave up polygamy, they decided to pivot from being, we're going to go into the territory, we're going to be cut off from the world, to now they're changing the tactic and the ideology basically to be in the world, but not of the world. And part of that, a great example of that, is the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. The Mormon Tabernacle Choir, it was first started just as a singing choir that was meant to sing at different meetings. Mormons have something called General Conference, which is where all the prophet and the apostles speak. It's an important meeting. It actually just happened. And the choir first started as just a choir that sings the songs as part of this important meeting. But after the manifesto in 1890, and keep in mind they said they were going to give up polygamy, they kind of did. They continued to practice it into the early 1900s quietly. But after they gave up polygamy on paper, the Mormon Tabernacle Choir goes on its very first world tour in 1893. And you can go and see this big long list of all of these places. So prior to this world tour in 1893, they had never done this before. But they go on their first basically public relations singing tour where they want to show the world that they've essentially colonized the West, they've colonized Utah, that they are a genteel people, and that they are also should be welcomed into modern society, even though they have this reputation of being this regressive polygamist cult. Someone actually shared via email some of their research on the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, and I found this quote to be very interesting from Benjamin Lindquist. The settlers, the Mormons, used sound as an element of colonization and of eventually to project their own civilized status back to America's East Coast in order to assert their claim to the land that they had settled and to overcome their marginalized status. They also, during this world tour, had a big competition, and they actually took second prize in this competition, and they've been pretty well known ever since. They first performed for U.S. president in 1911, and they've also performed at many Republican inaugurations. So they performed at Lyndon B. Johnson, Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, and Donald Trump. And so they sang at all of those inaugurations of all of those presidents. They also have claim to one of the longest running radio programs in the world, known as Music and the Spoken Word, which has aired every week since 1929. And so with the Mormon Tabernacle Choir and ballroom dance, we see really similar elements, where something that began as a cultural element of the Mormons out in Utah, dancing for fun, singing at their meetings, they package this up and then send it around the world as a way to say, hey, look at us. We're pretty great. We're pretty good at singing. We're pretty good at dancing. Maybe you want to know more. And so I wanted to use the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. When I talked to Dr. Machine, her direct quote was, "Mormonism as a machine is very good at PR." And I completely agree. I have another video where I talk about how the Mormon Church invests a lot of money into marketing online. And really, whether it's something on the internet, dance, any of these many different, missionaries, they have a lot of programs through which they are furthering their cause, getting a lot more money, and getting converts. Keep in mind, I said I had a friend who was a ballroom dancer who joined the Mormon Church because of his involvement with Mormon ballroom dancers. So these programs, they're not just for fun. They really do work to change the public's perception of Mormonism as a religion and to have a certain number of people who become interested in joining the religion as well. I think just as we see the Mormon Tabernacle Choir used as a way to get converts and get people interested in the church, or even just make the church something that's well known enough that people recognize its name. I also think it's funny, it used to be the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, and now it's just the Tabernacle Choir because we're not allowed to say Mormon anymore because of President Nelson, even though there was the I'm a Mormon campaign. It's all very silly, but I think we can see that the church does that in many different ways, and we also see that with these women and men on Dancing with the Stars who are beautiful, they're talented, they're engaging, they're great at dancing, that's for sure, and they serve as great images for the church. People who are showing that the church is doing some amazing things out there. And people who are even taking to social media, in the case of the video we watched, to say, hey, I love the church. The church has been great for me. It's been very positive. I'm raising my own children in the church. I think it's interesting, though, to see how the church has this very public relations friendly face. They even talked about how the songs that the Mormon Tabernacle Choir chose to sing are often very well-known Christian hymns that are broadly accepted within Christianity. If you go to General Conference, they're going to sing Praise to the Man, which is a song about, how much we love Joseph Smith, and Joseph Smith was a great dude, and the earth should atone for the blood of that man. It's a very warmongering song, in my opinion, and it's very hero worshipy, which is kind of just worship, in my opinion. But when they are often touring, it's songs from a Christian tradition, easily recognized by all the listeners present. You're not going to hear them singing Praise to the Man at any of the inaugurations, that's for sure. I think that same thing goes through with someone like Lindsay, where she is doing her makeup, chatting like we're just FaceTiming with her, but she's not wearing garments, and it feels like often the church's PR face, which is we're just normal Christians, we're just like everybody else, we love church on Sundays, we love prayers with family, we love reading the scriptures. It feels, though, to me, even coming from membership in that church, disingenuous, because they're not talking about how the Book of Mormon teaches that black skin is a curse, and they're not talking about the temple rituals where you promise to give everything you possess to the Mormon church. They're not talking about how Mormon women are taught to be wives and mothers to their husbands, and that is very much doctrinally accurate. And in the temple, I promised to obey my husband, even though he never made the same promise. So that's why I think the PR face, even the I'm a Mormon campaign, all of these things from missionary work, if someone had asked me about garments on my mission, I would have probably told a little white lie or said something like, you're not ready for that information. I might have, instead of lying, I might have just tried to redirect, but I definitely wouldn't have told them the truth. And I think that that's why a lot of these things are so icky to me, the PR version of Mormonism, because it feels so deceptive. And I don't think people should be deceived. I think you shouldn't need a PR version of your religion. You should just be able to have the religion. And yet we see the Mormon church producing a very highly produced version of itself that is very palatable to the American people, and very much hiding under the rug all of the stuff that once you get into the religion, you realize is a very real reality. I also found in the dissertation an interesting connection between ballroom dancing and money, which also feeds into the missionary work conversation, where this is a quote from Christopher Witt, BYU alum and UVU professor, said that one of the main benefits of being here in Utah is the general acceptance and support of dance by the LDS Church. And you can see that at the dance program at BYU, Mormon Church University. In fact, those are their headliners when they go out touring, or if they have any fundraising they need to do. They take a dance team and say, look how wonderful we are, now write us a check. The author of the dissertation also shares that she attended a rehearsal for the BYU touring company, the dance company, where they were preparing for a performance in honor of a family that donates multiple full ride scholarships to their team. So, if you donate a big check, if you write a lot of numbers on that line, we'll do a dance in honor of your family, and we'll prepare for that dance, and we'll show up, and we'll be glitzy. And I love how he says they take a dance team and they say, look how wonderful we are, now write us a check. And I think that just also shows how the church uses dance as a way to further their cause, in that they use it as an opportunity for fundraising. They use it as an opportunity to go around the world. We'll get into how the BYU dance team does all of these global tours, goes to all these different countries, and how much money people are willing to donate. Keep in mind, they're donating multiple full ride scholarships in addition to 10% of their income. There was a post recently on the ex-Mormon subreddit about the Philanthropies website. And if you go, and I'll link it below on the Philanthropies website, it basically says, if you'd like to donate us a house, that would be a great gift. Do you have a farm? You could donate us a farm. That would also be a wonderful gift. And the language are like, do you have stocks, securities, bonds? We'll take it all. And you can very much see how the church uses these programs like the Mormon Tabernacle Choir or the missionary program. You can also donate additional dollars to the missionary program. Anytime you see them asking for donations, just keep in mind that's in addition to the 10% people are giving. So that is how they've accrued over $200 billion, is by pulling out the collections plate. They don't literally have a collections plate. You write a check and give it to your bishop, but they're kind of in essence pulling out the collections plate at all these different opportunities to say, hey, thanks for enjoying the dance team. If you want to support the dance team, you can write us another check on top of the tithing money you already paid. The fact that they are preparing a dance in honor of this family who's donating all this money, I think is very telling as to how the church is viewing this crown jewel of the dance team is not just for missionary work. It's not just to, enjoy dancing with your partner and enjoying your body while it's dancing and having a great time. It's also because they want money, and the church is always looking for more ways to do a little bit of fundraising. Let's jump into how dance is still such a huge part of Mormon culture and how it is a bit problematic to that culture. We've touched on some of the tensions like garments, for example, or modesty, but we're going to discuss it a little bit more in depth. I've shared some of my stories too about how dance was part of my childhood. I still have memories of when I lived in Texas, they were opening the San Antonio Temple for the first time, and they had something called the Jubilee. And the Jubilee, they rented out the big stadium here. The prophet at that point, it was President Hinckley, he came to watch us perform. We spent months preparing for this. So we learned songs, we learned dances, we had several outfits. This is all of the Mormon youth in the entire region are preparing for this. It was called, like I said, the Jubilee. I don't think I can easily find pictures from this time because I don't think I had a Facebook yet. That's where most of my pictures come from. But I learned how to do square dances, line dances, waltzes, all of these different positions. And I mean, that is just one story. I have so many stories I can share about all of the times I was asked to dance as a Mormon youth. And I thought this quote was interesting. Scott Ashbell, former director of UVU's ballroom dance program, believes many studios in Utah teach ballroom from a young age, in part because the area's conservative religious parents appreciate the structured environment for boys and girls to enjoy each other's company. And I thought that was a perfect quote to illustrate why my parents enjoyed the dances. And it was, like I said, like Mormon speed dating, because it's something that you can do with the opposite gender that is, and even touching the opposite gender, oh no, that is still completely socially acceptable. Dr. Machine, who wrote the dissertation, also shared that dance is considered very masculine, which she said was quite different than the rest of the country. And I agree that basically in a lot of the country, for a guy to be dancing is not necessarily hyper masculine. But within Mormonism, it is something that's considered masculine. I met a lot of guys at BYU who actively wanted to take a class called social dance. And this class, you just go, and it's basically you just learn many different forms of dance, and you get to dance with someone of the opposite gender. People take this at BYU often as a way to meet, their future spouse or whatever. And that as a gendered sport, that basically, because Mormons are so focused on gender as an internal principle, there's no, you're not ever talking about being transgender or non-binary or anything other than very just the perfect example of a heterosexual, perfect example being culturally acceptable, perfect example of a heterosexual person. That is the element that makes them so perfect for ballroom dancing, because men in the Mormon church are raised from birth to be leaders, and women in the Mormon church from birth are raised to be followers. And ballroom dance, that is what you're pantomiming. There's the man who leads, it's called the leader. There's the woman who's the she's the follower. And because you're raised with this very gendered view of your identity, you're basically very much set up to already accept this is how we are doing this activity, and that the women are following and the men are leading, and that the men in leading in a dance is still considered masculine. When I was going to these church dances, we would often say, oh, that guy is really good at dancing, and that would make him more attractive. If you dance with him, he spins you around, he dips you, he does, the whole shebang. And that was definitely viewed as something that the girls were very much into. Even now, I think, when you see men in TikTok dances, there still can be men who are masculine dancing in a TikTok video, but a lot of TikTok dances are solo. It's you with the camera. I don't know any TikTok dances that I can do for you now, but it's usually solo dancing. So when you see men dancing in a TikTok video, it's usually one or three or however many of them, and they're doing their solo dance for the camera. Whereas the dances that I learned growing up, and that Mormon youth and Mormonism says is important, these are the types of dances we should be doing, are partner dances. So these are dances where the man's hand is on your back, your hand is on his shoulder, you're up here, you're dancing together, you're practicing your steps. So the dances that Mormons learn are not TikTok dances, but they are partner dances, which is also helping, it's kind of preparing the Mormons as a culture, especially Utah Mormons, to be really dominant within ballroom dancing. This leads us into the topic of BYU dance specifically, and BYU was the first university to introduce dance into its curriculum. First university, full stop. The first university in the United States to introduce dance into its curriculum was BYU, and the school's involvement in the sport stretches back a long time. Even now, BYU is one of the only universities to grant a degree in ballroom dancing, and Utah Valley, which we've talked about, is the other. So anywhere you go in the country, when you go to a university, it's very hard to find a ballroom specific degree. So not just that you have classes in ballroom dancing, but that you can get your entire degree in ballroom dancing. BYU and Utah Valley are some of the only in the country, maybe the only from what I could tell in my research. And so these programs, which have been set up for a very long time, are the only programs in existence. So if you're just some person, some teenager growing up in wherever, Alabama, Kentucky, Ohio, wherever, California, and you somehow get interested in ballroom dancing as you are becoming interested in the sport and looking, how can I do this professionally, you're going to probably end up looking into BYU as one of the only options where you can graduate with a degree in this and not just take classes on the subject. Many of the dancers from Dancing with the Stars got their dancing start in many different places. From what I could tell, the Arnold sisters are the only ones who went to Utah Valley University for their training. A note too that not only do these universities have these programs, but these programs are also nationally recognized. Dr. Machine made an interesting comment. BYU is also in their program known for something called formation dancing, where all the couples are dancing in formation. I'm not a dancer myself, but I was almost thinking, how cheerleaders are all doing something in formation, but that these dancers are also doing something in formation. They're all doing something at the same time in sync. And she shared that in a lot of universities, this is really hard to get the students to participate in and master because they want to be individualistic. Formation dancing means that no one is the standout star of the show, but that everyone is playing their own piece of the puzzle. They're all dancing in sync, and no one is standing out as the individual to watch. And she said that is something that is kind of atypical in other dance programs. Someone wants to be the one that's out front. They want to be competitive. They want to be the best. Whereas in a place like BYU's program, it's more so centered on community. It's more centered on everyone participating at once to create a great, think of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. It's the same thing. Mormons are taught to be very community-minded versus individually minded. Think of, even the Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, everyone saying they all look really similar, so much so that they can't tell them apart. Mormonism is a very homogeneous, community-centered culture where everyone's trying to be the same. Everyone's focused on the straight and narrow path. There's only one right way to live, and we're all trying to be that perfect wife, that perfect mommy. And so that mentality also supports these formation dances because everybody is already trained to think as a community and to view themselves as a member of a community, not to see themselves as an individual necessarily. A quick note too, that sometimes when I make these cultural observations, people say, what's so wrong with being in a community? Why are you always saying everything is bad? Why are you saying abstaining from drinking is bad? I'm not really, it's not like everything I ever say as an ex-Mormon is meant to just be hypercritical. I think if you're existing within your community and you're supporting your community, of course I don't believe that is pure evil. I think more that often my criticisms of some of these structures comes from the idea that they're ordained of God and that questioning them is bad and evil. I don't think there's anything wrong with choosing not to drink. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, hey, I kind of want to fit in with my community. I don't want to be so much the one that's out there. I'm more of an introvert, whatever. None of these things are necessarily good or bad. There are many choices that people should be allowed to make. It's more that if you're taught that there's only one right way to live and that this way is the right way, otherwise you're sinning or you're less good in some way, that's what I take issue with. This conversation about how everyone at BYU buys in with the idea of community also reminded me of that Reddit post that I read at the beginning, saying that the Mormon dancers are much more amenable with the celebrities and they're maybe easier to work with. I don't know much at all about Eastern European dance specifically, so I'm just going with the idea that what this person is saying is true. But if there's one group of dancers who's much more, this is how you need to dance, this is how you should be, you're doing it wrong, versus a Mormon who is more friendly and kind and not wanting to hurt anyone's feelings or step on anyone's toes and just trying to be nice all the time, then yeah, I think that plays in with this whole BYU community-centric, everybody's kind of trying to play nice all the time, that would be complementary to what Dancing with the Stars is, which is to make it so that the celebrity actually is the standout performer and that the dancer is complimenting but not standing out so much that they are overshadowing or upsetting the celebrity who is the one that everyone is really there to watch. It was also so interesting in reading all of this and having these conversations to realize just how much the doctrine of Mormonism complements ballroom dance specifically, the idea that gender is an inherent and eternal characteristic, men are leaders, women are followers, missionary work, don't hide your talent under a bushel, let it shine for the Lord so that you can glorify God, the idea that community is more important than the individual. Joseph Smith implemented something called the law of consecration, which is that you should give everything, all your worldly possessions, to the church, and then Joseph Smith and his leadership would dole out and say, okay, you deserve this because you have these kids, or you deserve this because you have this need, and that all community assets are shared rather than owned by a specific person. Another comparison I saw is that Mormons don't believe in the fall of Adam. So a lot of Christian religions say that when Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden, took a bite from the apple, they have original sin and that we are inherently sinful, and that our bodies are something that is more or less inherently evil and that we are looking for redemption, versus Mormon belief is more that our bodies are meant to glorify God, and Mormons do not believe in original sin. They believe that when Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden, it was essentially a step upwards instead of a fall back. They stepped closer in the plan of salvation. And so all of these things, Mormons using dance to glorify their bodies versus other sects of Christianity saying that the body is sinful, that dance is sinful, that moving in certain ways or using your body in certain ways is sinful. It just shows how long the list is, that you wouldn't think doctrine is going to be complementary to a sport necessarily. But as I'm reading and doing this research, I was just struck by how many times I'm coming across doctrines that are directly compatible with ballroom dancing as an art form. And that's what I think I found very interesting, and really is echoed throughout so many aspects of Mormonism. I use the Mormon Tabernacle Choir for an example. Another interesting factoid is that Mormons don't allow certain instruments to be played during a church service. So, like, for example, the trumpet. You're not allowed to use a trumpet in a Mormon church service, but you can use a cello or a violin. Stringed instruments are much more acceptable than brass instruments, which isn't, super surprising, but it is funny that there is a certain morality behind different instruments in how reverent they are, which is why you'll find more Mormons who are going and competing to be in stringed instruments in their professions than brass instruments, because you can't play it in church, so they're not trying necessarily to learn about those instruments. You can do flute though, and you can't do guitar. So maybe it's not about the type of instrument. I never played an instrument. I tried to learn the piano. I'm the only one in my family that never really quite got there as far as an instrument goes. So I don't have a complete list, but essentially it's based on just the reverence of the instrument itself. And there were even instances where someone would be really good at an instrument and they would want to play it in church, and they would try to ask the bishop, hey, can I play this instrument in church? And no matter how good they were at that instrument, if the instrument isn't on the approved list because it's irreverent, then the bishop won't let them play no matter how talented they are. So I think it just shows how there's these parts of Mormon culture and doctrine that seem so like standalone, like maybe it only really relates to marriage or child rearing or, you know, how we are doing the sacrament meeting. But then you quickly realize how those, because we are saying these are our values, those impact the culture and the outcomes of the people living under the doctrine in unexpected ways, like ballroom dance. So BYU's ballroom program was chosen in 1993 to host the World Amateur Championships. And this was a really big deal. This is one of the most major competitions in the ballroom world. And so this further established BYU as being one of the most well-recognized and elite programs. On the BYU Ballroom website, I found this quote interesting. They say, "It is of interest to note that over 4,000 students take some type of ballroom dance class each year at the university." I never took ballroom dance. I shared some people took social dance. I actually took Polynesian dance because I thought that would be more interesting because I already, you know, as I shared from my youth experience, I'd already done so much waltzing around all the time. So I took Polynesian dance, also wasn't very good at that, but it was fun and interesting. But so many people are involved in the ballroom dancing program at BYU. Every year, the BYU Ballroom Dancing Touring Company is the nation's undefeated champion. They've been the undefeated champion since 1982 and now hold several British formation lines. And so I'm just sharing this mostly to establish just how well known BYU's program is within not just Utah, not just the United States, but globally as well. I did speak to one other person who is very involved with ballroom dance. They shared that they actually went to BYU's amateur competition, and they shared that it actually ruffles some feathers wrong because basically BYU has an entire different set of standards and expectations for modesty as far as the outfits go. So a lot of the dancers have to modify their outfits just for this one specific, you know, they have tons of competitions they attend, but they have to modify their outfits for this one specific competition. Or if they can't modify or choose not to modify their outfit, they have to buy an entirely separate outfit for this competition, which is hundreds of dollars. And so she shared that a lot of people are frustrated by this BYU dance standard, which I found to be very interesting. And Dr. Machine shared this as well, that basically at BYU and all of the BYU Mormon dancing, their costumes are less modest than your average Mormon garment wearing person on the street, but more modest than ballroom dancing in general. So I thought that was interesting too, that there's this tension where Mormons have spent a lot of time working on maintaining, the church has made this amazing ballroom dancing program, but then over the years, ballroom dancing has become more sensual, more close contact. It's also started to say that it doesn't have to just be a man and woman dancing. It can be women with women, men with men, non-binary people. There is no really concept of gender necessarily now, like there would have been 50 to 100 years ago when Mormons were first getting involved in ballroom dance as a concept, or over 100 years. And so they both kind of echoed the idea that the Mormon church is walking this tightrope, which they walk constantly between being traditional and saying we're still going to be more modest. You know, at this competition, we're more modest than most of you, but we're also less modest than what is expected for people to wear at BYU from day to day that would cover the religious garment. This person I talked with also shared that often the the songs and the choreography that the people that the BYU program chooses is very cringy or sometimes even just racist. For example, she said that there was an all-white cast of dancers, or mostly white cast of dancers. Keep in mind, these are all white kids from Utah. They did this dance to Black Panther, and at the end they did the Wakanda Forever thing. It was just a very awkward and tone-deaf choice. They also did a rendition of Kung Fu fighting. Everybody was Kung Fu fighting. They all have chopsticks in their hair, and they're pantomiming martial arts, and they're just acting out what these white instructors and mostly white dancers are just imagining about the stereotypes of what, basically they've seen Mulan. So that's what they're pulling from. And so I found that to be completely unsurprising as well. In the Book of Mormon, Joseph Smith basically claims all of Native American history is Mormon history, and that the story of the Book of Mormon is of Native people in the Americas, and that he actually knows the real origin and faith of these people, not actual real Native Americans living in the world today. And so Mormonism often, because they think they're the one true church, they would, I think, very much so believe they have claim on every culture because they have claim on religious dominance. They're the one true church. They have the truth of God. All people in effect are Mormon or will someday be baptized to be Mormon, whether in this life or the next. And so I've often seen how Mormons, I think I've shared this in videos before, but there's this Facebook account that was shared all over the ex-Mormon subreddit because they are using AI to basically generate images of missionaries going and seeing all of these Disney princesses. So there's one with Moana, there's one, I'll show some of the screenshots here. But it's basically sharing that Mormons often feel that they have claim to every culture, every group of people. They send missionaries everywhere. They're a global church. They're a worldwide church. And so they wouldn't necessarily say that there's anything wrong with an all-white group of dancers doing Wakanda Forever or doing their cheesy little karate chops while having chopsticks in their hair. They wouldn't think that that's culturally insensitive in any way because doctrinally, once again, we see the doctrine backing up how they're choosing to move through the world. Those people are Mormon or someday probably will be baptized to be Mormon. And so all cultures are Mormon cultures. There's no sensitivity to say, maybe we shouldn't do that because it may be disrespectful to that particular culture. If you were raised Mormon or are in the process of leaving the church yourself, a quick plug for my book, How to Leave the Mormon Church, an Ex-Mormon's Guide to Rebuilding After Religion. Thank you for anyone who's gone to leave it a review. I love reading the reviews and seeing how it's helped people. I'll put some of them here. I spent about 2 years writing this book. I put everything in it that I could think of all of what I've learned as I've left this religion. I've also had a lot of people share they've read it even when they aren't Mormon or leaving the Mormon church. They're just leaving high demand religion in general, and they shared it was very helpful. Not that all of it is pertinent, but there's a surprising amount of overlap in those who are leaving high demand religions in all of the many, many choices that we face after we leave groups like this, from telling your family to making choices for what you're going to do next with this life that you thought you had all planned out and is now just a dumpster fire in the ground. So consider checking it out. I'll put it in the link below. Dr. Machine also shared that another reason why the BYU ballroom dancing team is so dominant is specifically because boys go and serve 2-year missions. So the implication of that is that usually Mormon boys go on their missions, and they almost all go, especially if they're going to a place like BYU. That means they're pretty devout. They go on a 2-year mission starting at 18. That means, though, that when they come back from their mission, they're between 20 and 21, depending on when they left, and when they start the university experience. So that means starting at their freshman year, they are 20 to 21. So they are potentially then going on these ballroom dancing tours, and they're competing against freshmen, sometimes who might be as young as 17. Some people start college when they're still 17 at at, to maybe just 18 or 19, but they are at the very least 2 years on average older than their fellow dancers who are men because they're just starting their university experience 2 years after the average because of that 2-year mission, which that goes into sports, that goes into academics. It just means that they're often competing with people 2 years younger than them who are maybe smaller, less built. And so she shared that some of her dancers, when they've seen the BYU dancers, they've shared, these men look so much older. And she'll just let them know, well, that's because they're 2 years older on average because they've served 2-year missions and put off their college experience in order to go on their mission trips, which if you haven't seen my video about how I wasted my time on my Mormon mission, definitely suggest checking that out after this one. It's also why you often see a 2-year age gap in Mormon dating relationships, because the men come back from their 2-year mission and they're starting their freshman year, and the girls, because they don't serve at 18, they typically don't have as much pressure to serve and serve less often, and they are waiting till they're 19. And that's why you often see this 2-year age gap and this power differential between men and women at BYU dating, because when men are freshmen, they're 20, and when women are freshmen, they're 18, and that's the dating pool. So you're having these 18-year-old girls who just are barely out of their home, who are being told to get married as soon as possible, make babies as soon as possible. They're just leaving their Mormon household, and these men who are 20, who have just served 2 years missions, often in foreign countries, learning a foreign language, learning more about the world, who are coming back to look and get married as soon as possible. So the most average age gap, in my experience, between a Mormon man and a woman, 2 years. Typically, the girl gets married at 18 or 19, and the man gets married at 21, 22, 23. So it does create this power imbalance, in my opinion, that I think is often, you see that in Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, that is not always the best, because it just means that there's a mismatch there. I wanted to conclude the video with discussing a few more of the tensions that exist between ballroom dancing and Mormon doctrine and tradition. We've talked about how the outfits are more conservative than your average ballroom dancing outfit, but less conservative than your average Mormon modesty expectations. Also, a quick note that when I was growing up, it expressly said in the For the Strength of Youth that you should not alter your clothing or standards for any social event. So if I go back and look at my prom pictures, I always wore this little cover up, because the dress was either strapless or it's like spaghetti strap. So I always wore a cover up. Even on prom night, that was a huge thing that I was taught, is even on prom night, you should not be showing your shoulders. Ex-Mormons nickname them porn shoulders. So I always had my little cover up, because it does teach you shouldn't alter your standards for different occasions. They do have a new version of that, and they got rid of that. So I think maybe they're just saying, if you're ballroom dancing, some people are now even walking out of the temple wearing strapless dresses or dresses that don't work with garments. So this church is a new world that I am still shocked by, because I think the rules are just a little bit more loosey-goosey than I was raised with, and even becoming more loosey-goosey than I think was even doctrinally expected a decade ago. In the dissertation, she wrote, "One student at BYU I interviewed explained that originally her husband was not comfortable with her dancing with other men, so he tried to learn. He discovered that he hates dancing, so now he allows her to dance with other men." So that's the other, another rift, another tension, is they're doing these very sensual dances, and it's not usually with their spouses, though it does seem that often people who pair up actually are two ballroom dancers who get married. And the other person I spoke to said that those are often some of the people who win the most awards because they're married, which is atypical for the ballroom dancing community at large. But within Mormonism, they're married, so they're dancing together at home. They're more in sync with each other. They're lifelong partners. And so that's another element of advantage often used by dancers, specifically Mormon dancers from BYU. Another big tension that has become more relevant in the most recent years is the idea of gender fluidity. So historically, ballroom dance has been very much about men as men leading the dance and women as women being led, and there's not a lot of fluidity. Dr. Machine shared that when she went to go observe some of these classes, she asked if women and men, ever changed parts, if women were ever leaders or men, or if two men danced together. And she said that anytime she raised a topic like that, she was kind of, said, no, the students really aren't interested in that. And she said that once when she brought it up and the person is in the process of saying, oh, well, we're maybe willing to do that, but the students aren't particularly interested in doing that kind of dance. She said that there were two men, BYU students in the corner who were dancing together as they're saying that. So it's almost like any question of the students who are saying, hey, we want to do something that's less traditional. I'm maybe non-binary, but I'm more in the closet. I'm queer in some way, that the instructors and the school at BYU is very not LGBTQ friendly, that they're not really given an opportunity to explore any other option other than the very traditional version of ballroom dancing. I found it interesting because as she shared that it's actually really helpful to know both parts, and a lot of people from BYU go on to be dance instructors, and if you're the instructor, you do need to know how to do both parts, because you need to first teach the male or the leads part, and then you need to teach the female or just the follows part. And if you don't, as the teacher, know both parts, you can't teach the dance as well. And so she shared it's not even just about being, queer friendly necessarily. It's just that it's better practice to be able to teach people both sides of the dance equation. And that because BYU is so steeped in this traditional way of thinking, they struggle to even see how that would be helpful. And they don't want to engage with the idea that people should learn both parts because they're so focused on gender and so focused on the leads and the follows and how men and women are attached to that they can't even see through this idea that, we're not actually, we're not married. We're not dancing because we're at a church dance. We are dancing as an art form. We are dancing to show our dominance. We don't need to be so closely tied with the idea of leads and follows tied to men and women, and that it's almost like they are sometimes shooting themselves in the foot a bit, from what she said, or just weakening the program because they're so unwilling to engage with changing tradition enough that it is still just complementing the basis of the program itself. In 2019, the National Dance Council of America, which is the governing board of dance, changed their rule to say that anyone could form a couple. So that would be, it used to be the couple was a man and a woman. And in 2019, this governing board changed it so that it could be a woman and a woman, a man and a man, non-binary people, whatever. And so any two people could enter one of these competitions and still be considered that they're following the rules, even if it's not strictly a man and a woman. And so everyone thought that BYU would get on board with this rule change because the National Dance Council of America is who gives BYU permission to host this event. So because this event is a sanctioned event through this governing board, everyone said, oh, well, okay, now BYU is going to allow, same gender dancing at this competition. BYU Dance Department Chair Kurt Holman said that BYU had originally received permission from the NDCA to operate under the old set of rules and maintain the female-to-male couple distinction. So initially, BYU, instead of being like, all right, we'll do it because it's part of the, we're part of this organization, we're gonna follow the organization's expectations. They said, hey, can we basically get a religious exemption from following these rules on our campus? So they're not even saying, can we get an exemption for our students? They're saying, can we get an exemption for anyone who's competing on our campus? So they're also saying anyone from any other school, if you've been practicing as a man and a man, a woman and a woman, and when you come to our school, we're not going to allow you to do that. When this back and forth was first happening and they were basically saying, hey, we still want to do it under the original rule, there was some outcry from the ballroom dancing community, as you would expect. And after some back and forth, ultimately they decided to change their expectation, which means that now BYU allows same-sex dancing, which is what this BYU article is about, that BYU will now allow same-sex couples in their national ballroom competition. I'll also link this article below. It's from the Salt Lake Tribune. Honestly, if you want some just amazing reporting on what's going on in Utah with Utah and Mormonism, Utah at large, the Salt Lake Tribune is one of my number one resources, so I now fully have a subscription to them because I read so many of their articles. So check out the Salt Lake Tribune. And so this article is about how two women made history at BYU by ballroom dancing together. So these women pictured here were the first ever women to be dancing at this competition as a couple, defined not just by man and woman, but as two people enjoying dancing with each other. I did think it was interesting in this article that these women who were dancing at BYU both grew up in Japan, and the article shares that in Japan it's not unusual for women to waltz together. They said mostly because few men are interested in the sport. So we sometimes have to dance with ladies. It's not a sensitive issue. We've been trained this way. I did a same-sex couple competition my whole dance life in Japan. So I think that does show a little bit more detail as to the fact that it's not actually uncommon for men and men or women and women to dance together, primarily because of the lack of men interested in dancing in some parts of the world. I think every time I've ever been to a dance, I live in Texas. I went to a rodeo a couple months ago, and there were a lot of just women dancing with each other, girls, probably they maybe in high school or college or whatever, and they just dancing with each other because often, maybe the men don't want to dance, and whether that's because of tradition, saying dance is not masculine, or if it's just because they don't want to go ask the girls, whatever. If you allow for same-sex dancing, it just means that if someone wants to dance, they can dance with their friend instead of having to maybe go ask someone of the opposite sex. So I like that when they interviewed them, they're sharing. It's not even kind of like how when I talked to Dr. Machine, she was like, hey, it's actually helpful to know both the leads and the follows parts, not because, even necessarily we're trying to make a statement about queer people, but because it's just better for all dancers to know all the parts. It's also, these women are saying there's few men in Japan, so because women can dance together, we get to enjoy dancing more often. And I think it's great too that when we allow men and men or women and women to dance with each other, queer people can dance with their partner potentially, or if they just want to dance with a woman, if you're maybe more comfortable. When we break with this tradition of this strict hierarchy, we are able to help and support and give accommodation to people coming from many different perspectives who want to enjoy this activity, but aren't able to enjoy it under the rigid and traditional values that have been set before us. If you enjoyed this topic, just a quick reminder to like this video and subscribe to my channel. I have a new video every week talking about anything from Mormon doctrine to Utah Mormon culture to anything to do with history on the topic. So if you want to see more, don't forget to subscribe. Drop a comment below if you have any lingering questions or a perspective that I didn't highlight, because the more I fell down the rabbit hole, the further it seemed to go. So this was kind of an introduction to the topic. I think also I don't have a background in dance, so this was kind of an outsider's point of view and perspective. I mean, I'm an insider in the fact I was raised in Mormonism and have a high familiarity with the doctrine, but an outsider considering I have never been a professional ballroom dancer. Surprise there. As I shared midway through the video, me and my husband are gonna practice learning the Mormon youth ballroom dance from that guide I showed. So hop on over to Patreon. I'm gonna post it there. It's gonna be painful to watch, but we did our best. And as always, I will see you all next week.